Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and why the best writers risk being strange. And my guest here today is Fred Kennedy, or otherwise known as Fearless Fred. Um, and I want to talk about a couple of things that you've been doing, Fred, but specifically and most of all, Dead Romans. So just
Yeah.
to give listeners a bit of context for this discussion, I was into the Calgary Comic Con lately, or Calgary Expo as it's called, and Fred was one of the guests there. And I was, roaming around doing my thing, and then I got food poisoning. I was just holed up in a hotel for like 2 days. When I finally emerged uh, and went back to the floor, I went to go, talk to my partners, business partners in comics world there. And Gregory had said to me, "Hey, this Fred Kennedy guy came by and bought this She-Wolf book." He's like the Dead Romans guy, and I was like, well, that sounds great. Dead Romans, I can get behind with that, whatever that is. So I went to go check out your panel, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting about that particular panel, and where I wanted to kind of follow the discussion up on this topic a little bit, was you had kind of talked about how you were kind of had all these things going on in the comics realm, finally starting to get some kind of traction, and then the pandemic hit, and everything starts to fall apart. And you kind of discussed a little bit in the panel about how you kind of got back on track, kind of dug out of the hole that the kind of frustration of that situation had created, and it really struck home for me because I'd had a sort of similar scenario in a different, maybe smaller scale, perhaps, but a similar scenario in that I was kind of like, I've been a writer for 20 years and been working on different things. Then I started to move into comics, and then my first, comic got picked up by Heavy Metal, which was my dream. It was the first comic I ever bought with my own money. Was a Heavy Metal magazine. So, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hits, and everything kind of becomes a disaster. The thing, I mean, I enjoy Heavy Metal. I've been happy with them overall, but they're in a weird spot right now, and kind of they furloughed their staff. They got kind of a question marks over their heads. The series I've got has these sort of question marks over its head, although it's doing okay generally speaking. But it's one of those things where it's kind of like I've got all this stuff on the go, and I'm not sure what I should do. So what I just did is I just pretended there was no pandemic. I just plugged forward. I've been piling up comics. Like I've literally got 8 issues that I just haven't. I don't even know what to do with them at this point.
Yeah.
I'll get them out at some point. But you had kind of a different situation. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about just sort of how that whole thing went down for you, and then we'll maybe get into some of the specifics of the Dead Romans and some of these other projects.
Well, it was frustrating because you get it. Like I've been writing for like seriously writing in the sense of like writing every day for like 12, 15 years. And then I did a lot of indie books, and those were very time consuming in that you've got to do everything like the lettering and then uh printing, and it's all out of pocket, and any kind of got a budget like how much you're spending versus how much you're going to make and how much you have to sell in order to turn a profit. And it becomes more of like you got to look at it as it's just like a hobby that sort of pays for itself, but the goal of course is always to progress and to be making money. And when you're writing, it's a longer slog than people that are drawing. And when I say that, there's this like this assumption that I'm saying it's easier to be an artist, and that's not it at all. They're very different crafts, they're very different things, they're both very difficult. But when you put art in front of somebody, it's there, they see it. They don't have to spend the time to read it and go through it. Like there's comics that have incredible art that have horrible scripts, and the artist that is working on them is going to progress versus the writer is not going to, simply because the art is so strong and just pops as soon as you see it. And so all of the creators that I've worked with in my indie years, like when I started going to shows with like my first actual indie books, I was hanging out with like Mike Walsh and Ed Brisson and Adam Gorham, and it was the four of us. We're tabling together all the time. And Ed was kind of like, Ed was where I am now. He'd been doing it for 10 years before, but he was just starting to crack, just starting to get his traction in. He was doing his first books with Image and then with Boom and Oni, and then all the Marvel stuff started happening. And Walsh and Gorham were just starting out, like they'd been doing it for like 3 or 4 years, but they were all just like getting their claws in. And as soon as we did um Teuton, which was the book I did with Gorham. That was the first real book that I did. And it was this book, and it was like historical fantasy. It was set in the Northern Crusades in Lithuania, and there was this sort of like conspiracy amongst the gods using both the Christians and the pagans to do their dirty work. You know what I mean? And we finished that book, and the month we finished it, Adam got pro work. Like it was, I forget who he was doing a book with. I think it was with Boom. I think no, it was yeah, it was Boom, and then some work with Dynamite, and then he got onto a big book with Valiant because Valiant had just relaunched. And he was doing a lot of work with Valiant, and then that all sort of like led into him doing stuff with Marvel, and it was this very clear path of progression. And I remember being very frustrated that like I wasn't achieving any of that success. I was still slogging and sending out pitches and sending out pitches and sending out pitches, and nothing was really happening. And then I was still doing a lot of indie stuff at the same time. And then I did a book with Chapter House. I don't know how many stories you've heard about Chapter House, but they're like a Canadian imprint. They were doing all the Captain Canuck stuff, and that turned into quite the debacle. And it was souring me to aspects of the comic book world, and it was leading up to the pandemic that I was still pitching. And I had one pitch that was clearly going the distance, like a lot of emails back and forth between me and the person who was going to be my editor. And then when Pencils Down happened, which is really just a Marvel thing, it really was kind of a shockwave where everyone kind of stopped. And then it was just like radio silence. And I've talked about this in the sense that it wasn't like I was dropped. There was no notice of this isn't happening. It was just you should kind of understand that this isn't going to happen. And these things sort of imploded, and I was very upset and I was very frustrated because I felt like I could smell it. You know what I mean? It's like it was there, it was coming, and my friends were like, it's going to happen. It's finally happening. It's going to happen. It's finally happening. And then it didn't happen. Like it just didn't friggin' happen. And I was so choked, and I started doing this radio play, a Star Wars fan made radio play, because I'd always wanted to tell my own Star Wars story. Like I'd always wanted to do it. And when the pandemic happened, there was this definite sense of mortality. Not in the sense that I was terrified I was going to die or anything, but just in the sense of like, dude, I'm in my 40s and I desperately want to write a Star Wars story. Will I ever even get to? And if I did, would I get to tell a story that I even like? So whatever, man. I'm just gonna do my own thing, and I'm gonna be able to do it on my own. Like I'm gonna write it, and I'm gonna do all the audio production because my day job works in radio, and I started in radio doing production. That's actually how I got my biggest break in my career in Winnipeg, was being able to do production as well. So I wrote this audio play. And then I started getting people that I'm friends with to do voices. And we had like people that work on Star Wars IP doing voices in it. So we had like Heather Antos, who is like the head editor of all the Star Wars stuff at Marvel. She voices one of the main characters. Mike Walsh, who I mentioned before, and he worked on Star Wars. He did a Star Wars. He did a voice in the story, and we had a cast of over like 116 people, and I was beholden to nobody. And it was the greatest vibe ever, man. It was such a good feeling. It was so awesome. And so I was working diligently on this audio play, which is now at like 32 episodes. Um, it's called Mud 79, by the way. I should really mention that. I'm terrible.
And is that
But
as a
I was working on this
podcast
audio
too?
play, and then I get a mess. Yeah, it was a
I just want to
podcast.
make
Yeah,
that
yeah. So
clear to
it's like a
people if they're listening. Like you can go find this. He's just
find it.
talking about. He
Yes.
says radio a lot, but he means this on as a podcast you can
Yeah,
subscribe
yeah,
to right
yeah,
now.
yeah. An
Right
audio
now.
drama. Audio drama, I guess is the term. But like, so a fan fiction podcast, I think is the term that we're supposed to use legally. So I did that, and it was great because I had this sense of completion. You know what it's like when you finish a story and you're doing your own thing, and it's like I was doing it, and I could just do whatever I wanted, and it was this awesome Platoon meets Star Wars, kind of the small people in the galaxy kind of vibe, which is a story that I think that Star Wars never does, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan. While I was working on this, like this caught me by surprise, and this is what I talked about at the panel was I was working so focused on this, I'd forgotten about everything else that I'd even started to work on. And then Nick, my artist that I work with on Dead Romans, who we started working on the pitch for Dead Romans in the fall of 2019. And I'd completely forgotten about it because he was working on all kinds of corporate art projects. And he's like, listen, I really want to do this. I'm stoked to do this, but I got other stuff. When I get to it, I'll get to it and I'll keep you posted. And I had forgotten about it. And then he emails me the pages and I'm like, whoa, this is actually like really good. This is hot shit. And so I sent it to Kalman Andrzejowski, who is like one of the people that I've been friends with in comics for years. And when I sent it to him, he was like, oh, he goes, dude, this is a pro pitch. He goes, this looks pro. He goes, just sending the pitch pages on this, you're gonna get through the door. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I'd forgotten about it. I'd completely forgotten about it. And then so when I got it, it was like there was no expectation. It was almost like found money, you know. It's like if you forget that you've got a $20 bill in your pocket and you leave it in your winter coat and you put it on in October, you put your hand and you're like, oh, pocket treasure. So this was like pocket treasure for comics, is what it was. And when I sent the pitch out for Dead Romans, I was almost like drowning in cynicism with it at this point. I was just sort of like, whatever, I'll send it out. And I sent out just the pitch pages, right? Just the pitch pages, no pitch package, just the pages. And then I got an email back from an editor at was it Boom? I think it was Boom. Yeah, it was Boom. And she gave me feedback that it was a rejection, but her feedback was awesome because she sent the feedback saying it's really not for us. And then here are the reasons why. You could tell they actually read it and they gave it thought. But the things that they were rejecting were things that were in the story. I just didn't highlight them in the pitch. You know, I didn't talk about what they were because we're not sure if this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And I was like, okay. So I reworked the pitch. And then I had my second round that I was sending out to. Not in the sense that they were secondary choices, but just I find it easier in the pitching process to send out to a few imprints at a time and then keep track of who you're sending it to. And the second round, I sent it to Jim Valentino. And like I sent just the pitch pages, no package. And when I sent the pitch pages, I wrote on the email, I said, look at these pages. They're gorgeous. And that's all I had on there. Because I didn't care. Like I was, like I said, I was resigned that it was just never going to happen no matter what I tried. And his response, I got an email back, like, because I sent this off before I left for work. So I leave for work, I get on the train, I get to work, and I get an email back from Jim Valentino, and it says, word of advice, don't tell me they're gorgeous. I'll know. And I'm just like, well, kind of dropped the ball on that one, man. And then, because there'd been that gap between me leaving for work and getting to work. And then, like 10 minutes after seeing that, I get another email from Jim Valentino. It says, wow, those pages are gorgeous. Send me everything you have. I'm like, okay. So then I just sent the pitch package, which had been revised because of the feedback that I'd gotten before. And when I sent the pitch package, I had a contract before the end of the day. It all just went so fast. And I met the editor who rejected me and gave me the feedback. I went to San Diego last year just to go because we had some signings at the Image table, which was a very cool vibe. And so when I met her in person, I said, hey, man, you might not remember this. I sent you a pitch package and you rejected it. And I could see the look on her face like, oh, one of these guys. And I'm like, but I need to thank you because of the feedback that you gave me on that rejection. I modified my pitch and then it landed, and I'm really grateful for the time that you gave me. And I think that that is something that people don't grasp enough, is that sometimes a rejection isn't a bad thing. It's sort of like if you're applying for a loan and the bank says you can't afford this, that's not the bank being a jerk. That's them looking after you financially in terms of looking after themselves. You're going to bury yourselves in debt. But her rejection allowed me to modify what I was sending out. And if I hadn't got that feedback, I don't know if the pitch would have actually landed in the end. So it was kind of good that it got rejected from that first batch of places I applied to. Humanoids actually was another imprint that we sent it to, and Humanoids did not take it. They did not take it.
One of the things I think people missed with rejections, I was trying to explain this to a writer I'm kind of mentoring the other day, but I was showing them my old query letters and rejections and pitches and things for the books that eventually came out. And I was just kind of walking them through like who rejected what, and then this and that and the other thing. And one thing people like forget about is when you send that pitch out or that manuscript out or whatever it is, and you get the rejection back. A lot of people see that as the end of the whole thing, but it actually is just you've introduced yourself to that person and now they've responded to you. And now you have a professional correspondence going. Yes, maybe the content of that correspondence is just you saying them things and them rejecting you, but it still is contact that you just made in a net way you've
Yeah.
expanded your network. And those people might take a different book from you. Like I had that situation with my first book, was rejected by a pub. I always tell this story where I had met this publisher of the editor of my favorite publishing company, which is Coach House Books in Toronto, and just a literary publisher, and they had rejected my first book, and then I ended up at one point. Like in that process, I was playing Words with Friends with her on Facebook. So there's literally a moment where I made my move, which if people don't remember, that was like basically like a Scrabble you played, not in real time,
I
over,
still
over
feel like that's
Facebook.
a new thing. How is that suddenly old?
Yeah, well,
Like,
it's
how is
old
that
now. This
a
is 2008 or something. So anyway, so she rejects my so I remember like making a move in Words with Friends, and my sort of joke about it is like she made a move, and then while I was making my next move, she sent me a rejection letter. That was
Yeah.
her move, you know.
Yeah.
But they end up taking my second book, and I had that experience that you're talking about where you kind of are getting all these rejections and stuff, and some of them are great, some of them are, but some of them like you can tell they read it, and this is a real response, and it's a person who's now seeing you as a professional. Like the thing I always say to writers is like real writers get
Oh,
rejections,
gross.
like that's the sort of thing, the thing that people kind of often forget. But don't you find that it's never the pitch that you think? Like you do all these things
Yeah.
in your career, and you always think like, "Oh, this will be
That's
the thing.
funny.
This will be the thing." But then it's never. Those are never the things. It's always something else that you just like. It's like when musicians write pop songs. They often will say like they worked really hard on this one and nobody listened to it. They spent 5 minutes this one and it was their hit.
Like you ain't seen nothing yet. Or no, Taking Care of Business by BTO. That was like a song that they had just basically thrown on the album. I just turned off my video just so you don't have to look at it. There you go. But Taking Care of Business was a song that was thrown on the album as filler to complete the track listing. And that ended up being by far the biggest hit they ever did, It's just like that. And with Dead Romans, I honestly didn't expect it to land, and the reason was is because I wanted it to land so bad. I always
Right.
wanted to do like an historical epic kind of story, but you never think you're going to get to. You think you have to tell like this weird story about quirky kids outside of the city having like a borderline horror type experience kind of thing. Like something that is out there already but with your DNA on it. And an historical epic isn't something that seems to be out there, but it was all I had left in the tank. So I just sent it out. And I remember one time talking with Ed Brisson about this specifically, and he's got that new book, The Displaced. He has been pitching that book for like a decade, and it's about his hometown, Oshawa, Ontario, and he kept getting told like, "Oh, you got to make these changes, got to make these changes, got to make these changes." He's like, "No, I'm not going to." And then the rejection was always like, "This is more like somebody's second book, not your first book. It's the book that like you got to get once you're established and whatnot." And so he just kept that close to his chest for years until he could do it his own way. And I was expecting Dead Romans to be like that. Is that I was going to try and do this story and then get rejected, 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 rejected. But when it came out, the reaction to that book has been awesome because there's nothing else like it out there right now. And the thing that makes it resonate so strongly is the exact reason that we were getting rejections. We kept getting told nobody wants that, it's not popular, blah 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 blah. And it's like we sold out of the first issue, we went into two printings, and then the second issue went into two printings, and we just found out on Friday that the hardcover sold out. They printed what they said was 2 years worth, and they're already going back into reprints, and it hasn't even been out for 9 months. And
I
that's a
think
cool feeling.
I think I bought the last hardcover on Amazon. I remember like saying there's one. They always say there's like one in stock, but
There,
but
we
anyway,
sold out on Amazon.
I
Like
couldn't buy yours
Amazon
at
ran
the
out.
con because you had sold
Yeah,
out there. Yeah.
I kept telling people like to go find Red Skull Comics in the main building. Come back and I'll sign it for you. I'm pretty sure they have copies, but there's none left of the first print run. So
Oh
that's
wow,
like a
that's
cool
amazing.
vibe.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and sorry, go
Romans are
on.
kind of having their time in a weird, sudden way. Like I mean,
Yeah.
you must get that hassled about that meme all the time.
So what's frustrating about that is that became a big like talking point between Nick, me, Jim, and Eric. Uh, and the thing was is that the second volume of Dead Romans is coming through Image Central, not Shadowline, and so we were in the process of negotiating the new contract to go to Image Central, and then the meme came out right when we were at that dead point. We were waiting for the hardcover to come out, and we didn't have the hardcover on hand, and we had already finished selling all the single issues. So it was in that dry gulf between that no man's land. So we couldn't even really take advantage of it. It was just very frustrating. It was a very
That's
frustrating spot to be in. But we were like, we kept trying to hype up, oh, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. It was still, but it was kind of like it was a little bit aggravating, but you know what? It worked out in the end. We can still lean on that. And anytime anything Roman comes up, we 100% bring it up. But yeah, the Roman Empire, like how often do dudes think about the Roman Empire? And it's
yeah.
like a lot,
Especially how often you've been thinking about it.
so much.
Can you talk
So
about a little bit about Arminius and who that really is in history, and kind of how the sort of backdrop for your story and sort of what you're focusing on in Dead Romans?
such a fascinating character, and you could argue that he is like a hero. You could argue that he's a villain. And I don't think you're wrong in either argument. I don't like this, they're that. One thing can be many things to many different people depending on their perspective. And Arminius was a guy, and he was a prince. He was a prince of the Sharutsi tribe, and they were one of the big tribes in Germania. And when Germania was conquered by Rome, colonized by Rome, um, they were one of the major peoples in the area. And the Romans had that policy where when you conquered the people to keep the rulers in line, you took their children. And you didn't take their children and then treat them like prisoners. It's like you brought them to Rome, you raised them amongst the nobility, and you showed them this is why you lost. This is what we do. This is why we always win. They're like the Borg collective. They bring you back, they make your own like uniqueness as part of the collective, and then they send you back out. And the thing that was wild was that and this could be, and the thing is that this history is so skewed and it's been rewritten so many times. So whether any of it is super accurate, who really knows? You can find 8 different versions of any single event, but the consensus, consistent take that you see is that a lot of these Germanic princes and children of nobility and war chiefs, etc., that were brought to Germania really got it. Like the Roman way of warfare, they got it. It clicked. They understood it. They didn't shy away from combat, and they understood the concept of warfare on a grand scale. And Arminius is as like a general in the Auxilia, he wound up becoming an Akite. Like he earned the status of nobility by his own accomplishments in the battlefield. And there was the big revolt in Pannonia, and I think there was like 8 legions that were there, and he won distinction time and time and time again, and he was really respected amongst the Roman soldiery because of his command acumen. And when he goes back to Germania, he was meant to be a bridge between the Germanic people and the Roman people. And the guy that they sent to be the governor in Rome was this guy, Gaius Quintilius Varus. And he had been the governor in Syria, and he had been sent to Syria as a guy who could just crack the whip and get things back in line, because there was lots of revolts, there was lots of rebel activity, and he would come in and he would come down hard and did lots of cruel and awful over the top things that we consistently associate with Roman oppression. But he quelled all the results were there. The revolt stopped, the rebellion stopped, the money started rolling back into Rome. That's all they cared about. As long as the gold and the grain is coming, they're fine. And that's what he did. So the idea was, with a wild place like Germania, you send a guy like that in, and he's going to break him. They didn't realize that Germania and Syria are very different places. The Romans had the system of taxation. The Germanic peoples didn't understand the concept of taxation. So the Romans would come in and they would demand taxation. And the idea was that this taxation is going to be used to build cities, roads, aqueducts, infrastructure, all those things. But they weren't seeing it. Like there were most of the cities that were being built in Rome were only even habitated during the summer because they were having to build from the ground up. And my theory, my own personal theory from all the things that I read, was that they tried to do too much too quickly, and they tried to push it too fast, and then it all blew up in their faces. They tried the same thing in Gaul, but Gaul had been different because there was the Gallic Wars, where there was an absolute total defeat of the Gallic population, which led to it being an easier time for them to build all that infrastructure because they'd broken the resistance. With Germania, there was like a series of wars and then a quelling of the population. They never actually did what they had done in Gaul. So when they go to Germania and they start doing all this taxation, there's all this resentment towards the Romans. And when a guy like Varus comes in, there's no effort to explain this is what we're doing. It's, oh, you're not paying, we'll just crucify the whole town as a lesson for everybody else. That didn't work very well. And I've read so many different versions of how this all went down. But when Arminius went back to Germania, there's one version where it's like he went to his home village and met his father, and he was dressed as a legionary, and his father was like so disgusted at his son wearing the uniform of the oppressor. And then he showed him, this is what they're doing. This is what they're doing to us. And he made his son swear to free their people. There's another version, and the version we use is that when he was a child, he swore to always be German, which I don't necessarily believe is as accurate because it sounds way too similar to Hannibal Barca's story. But it's also looked cooler, the story, so you have to use it. You know what that's like.
Well,
But
can we talk a bit about what that's like? Because so you've obviously done an incredible amount of research for the story, but the mistake that a lot of writers will make is all that stuff you just said they'll put into the book.
yeah, well, you
And so I'm
can't
wondering
because
how do you approach it though? How do you select, pick, approach what goes in and what doesn't go in?
it's got to serve the story. Everything's got to serve the story. It's got to be slick. It can't be bloated. I'm not an established guy. I'm I'm not George R. R. Martin. I can't write 10 pages about the recipes being used to make the food of what the characters are eating in the story. No one's going to give me that time of day because they don't know who I am and they don't care. So if it's not serving the story, then you get rid of it. You got to kill your darlings. You got to make your characters suffer, and then you got to kill those parts of the book that you might love to death, but don't actually serve the story. They serve your love of the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that's
that's a great
something
way to
that
put it.
it's like the story has got to flow. It's got to get from point A to point B, and it needs to give relevance to the characters and what they're doing. The scene that we have in the book is told in a flashback of him remembering what it was like as a child, being told by his father as he's about to be sent to Rome as a child, saying like, this is who they are, this is what they do, don't ever forget who you are, the blood that flows in your veins, the greatest treasures will always be east of the Rhine, and you need to remember that. And so we played that line that his dad never really had interactions with him later on, because it suited the story better to have him be on his own, and it gave him much more of a stronger solitary vibe, made him more dramatic as a character. We do have like a Jiminy Cricket character, his cousin Hermeric, who is a completely fictionally made up character. We made that guy up, but the idea that we wanted to have with Arminius as a character versus an historical figure is that he is a guy that his entire life has been spent in pursuit of what others have told him to do. So he is a child and he's being sent to Germania because his father lost a war. On his way to go to Rome, his father tells him, this is who they are, learn what they do and use it to destroy them. That is what you need to do. And he's being told, this is what you need to do. He gets to Rome. The Romans tell him, you need to train to be a soldier. You need to be a general. You need to do this. And it's it's a doubling down of these things he's been told that he needs to do. He goes back to Germania. He sees the suffering of his people. He needs to free his people because that's what he's been told he needs to do. That's what his purpose is. And he's never had purpose for himself. It was purpose that was placed upon him. The only thing in his whole life that was ever his, that he pursued on his own, that he wanted, is the character Honoria, who again is fictional, but we built up a story that coincided historically with the life of Gaius Quintilius Varus. So he wants this one woman, and even the opening of the book, the opening 9 pages are like, that is the core of the story. The core of the story is him telling her, I'm going to free you. And everything that he's trying to do is for that goal. He's got to do what he's been told to do, but in the process, that's for him. She is for him, and he'll do anything to keep her safe. And then along the course of the story, he's consistently trying to go find her on his own. He wants to find her on his own. And he's got his Jiminy Cricket character telling him, listen, man, if you don't take charge of this army, they're going to fall apart and we're going to lose everything. So you need to keep this army together because you're the only one that can do it. And by the time that he is able to go look for her himself, it's too late. And the one thing that he wanted, the only thing that he wanted, he loses. He loses. And in the process of writing the story, there is this idea, you watch this transformation of this character, because when you see him at first, the first time you see him in the very beginning of the story, he's naked. He's naked. He's got nothing. No suit, no costume, nothing. That is who he is at his core. He is with her. He's telling her he loves her, that she is his queen. Then he gives her his sword, which is like the most on point phallic thing you can possibly do. He gives it to her. He gives her his manhood, like figuratively and literally. He gives it to her because he's giving everything he has to her. And that scene kind of gets like looked over, but to me, it's the most important thing possible because you're dealing with a guy who has made his life by the sword, and then he gives it to her. And if you look at it from the modern day context, you're missing out on how important that is. That's such an important thing for him to do. He's naked, he gives her his sword, then the next time you see him, he's wearing Roman garb, wearing the general armor, everything, and he's betraying Rome. He's betraying Rome. And gradually, as the story goes along, there's this, I think it's my favorite panel in the whole book, and it shows him, it's right at the end of the 5th issue, and it shows him on the hilltop looking down, and he is the
Hmm.
Germanic king. He is the king of the woods, the stag that feasts upon the branches of Yggdrasil. He is wisdom, he is incarnate, he is terror, he is power. But he still doesn't have the one thing that he wants. Because again, like, that's just him in a guise, that's him in a role. When he's got nothing else, he is this helpless boy who just wants to be with her. Like, that's all he wants. And he loses everything. He wins, but he loses. And it's like, he can't have a happy ending. And there's, like, to me, there's a very personal statement in that, is like, when you spend your life doing things that you're told to do, that you think you need to do, you may achieve power, you may achieve greatness, but it's going to leave you in the dark alone, because you'll never have what it is that you really wanted. You're not going to be happy. And in the second arc, that really plays a role in the way the characters sort of progress in arc 2. And I love Honoria's character as well. I think that she has she believes in him so much that even when everybody is telling her with firsthand account information, Arminius betrayed us, you know that, she's like, no, he didn't. He's a great guy. And he is a great guy. Like, he is a great guy. He will do anything for her. It's just he wasn't honest with her, and it costs him everything.
One of the things I think is really interesting about how you approach that, uh, the love story that in some ways is at the core of this, is in a lot of other stories, the complaint I often make is, you have this war and it exists only to bring these characters together or drive them apart. Whereas I think what you kind of see in Dead Romans is, this war is overwhelming everything.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to hold on to each other and hold on to this thing that matters to, he's trying to hold on to this woman that matters, but he can't. It just the situation is so much bigger than he is. The historical context is overwhelming him. The politics are overwhelming everything. He can push against it. He can, make his moves, but ultimately he doesn't have the control, because it's the world is too big.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting, and I think a much more honest approach than you usually see in war stories.
So that is honestly one of the things that I also get very frustrated with, is that you brought up how it's bigger than them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And whenever people talk about, oh, this character's not controlling the action, not everybody is controlling the action. Sometimes agency has nothing to do with controlling the action, but how you react to the things that are going around you. If you're telling the story about somebody who is a soldier, who is a general that is in a massive military force, sometimes the only control they have is the reaction to things that are out of their control. They're swept up in what's going on. And with Arminius, you see that, like, he wants to be with her, but he can't because everything around him is falling apart. And it's like, we all do that in our day-to-day lives. Like, we get caught up in what we're trying to do with our day jobs, and we put our family on the back burner, and by the time you get back to it, you the pot's boiled over, metaphorically, you know what I mean? You're letting things get out of the way. And I just I'm so I can relate and empathize so much with both Honoria and Arminius as characters, because Honoria, whereas Arminius has been raised his whole life to view Rome as, they murdered his family, and they show him all the people that have been crucified as traitors are all on the crosses, which was something that they did for anything from, like, not paying taxes, just to make an example out of people. Whereas Honoria, her family, who were in Syria, and they're Hellenic because this is a time where uh, this is post her people came. She even explains this in the story. Her people came with Alexander when he settled the former Persian Empire, and in Syria it was a lot of Hellenic culture. And her family were servants in Varys's household, and by misadventure or adventure, she winds up endearing herself to Varys, and he makes her frumentarii, like one of his agents, one of his assets, like his spy, assassin, courtesan, just a cleaner upper, a doer of things, which is something that the Roman nobility did all the time. The intrigue and all the things that were going on is pretty gonzo. Um, but she sees Rome and the empire as something that elevated her, and not just the empire, but Varys specifically. And she has sworn herself to him and is beyond loyal to the end, like the classic ride or die. She is loyal to the end. And when she realizes that the guy that she loved so much was so two-faced and deceptive to somebody that has done everything for her, it's like it breaks. There's that like conflict. And at the end, all she has is the concept of honor and loyalty. And she loves Arminius. Arminius is chosen family, but Varys was chosen family first. And for her, like, how can you expect me to turn on this guy? Like, and I do wonder, and even as I that idea, you should know everything that your characters would do. No, honestly, I'd really have to sit and think about it. Like, if Arminius had told her what was going on before it all went down, I do legitimately wonder what would have happened. You know, I wonder
Sure,
how
yeah.
she would react. Yeah, and would she have been okay with Rome as long as Varys was okay? But then she would have known what would have happened to Varys and his family after the fact. I do wonder how that would go down, and I wonder if Honoria as a character would have ratted him out. Part of me thinks that she would have, but for her, it wouldn't have been ratting him out so much as she probably would have just killed him. Like she would have like
Hmm.
slit his throat, whatever, while he slept. Like she would have ended the problem because that's what she's been trained to do. That's the way she's lived her whole life. That's what she has a body count of like dozens of very powerful individuals all across the empire. And there's a scene where it straight up shows her leaving a room with a naked dead guy laying on a bed,
Yeah.
and she's just like, just another day at work. You know what I mean? So like,
Hmm.
I really loved those two characters. They're both so dangerous, but in very different ways. I like, I love them so much. I love the way that their relationship works. And I do wonder like how vicious the kids they would have raised. Like another one of my, it's not like my favorite panel, but one of my favorite scenes is the scene where it shows Arminius holding the dress and imagining their future together. And there's some subtle
Mm.
notes in that scene where he's holding the baby. And I want him to hold the baby because he really just wants that. Do you know what I mean? Like he wants
Right.
to be a parent. He wants to be with her. And when you look at the image, the way the backdrops are set up, it's like she wanted to grow grapes. He was listening to all the stories that she told about how they wanted to grow wine. She grew up on a vineyard. She wanted to make wine. And in his version, his fantasy of their life together, he's giving her what she wants. And he's carrying the baby, and she's got the wine, the grapes, and she's going through the vineyard. And I think that is so great because it's such a conflicted image of, you could walk away from that book thinking, oh, he's just a guy who was like using her and he thought that she'd just be his side piece. If that's all you're getting from it, you're not looking at what's going on because that's not who he is as a character. And she also had that dream of that life together. Like she's looking back fondly of those walks that they had where he's explaining who his people are, where he came from, all that. Like there's so much love between these two characters.
Well, and it
There's
has
no
a,
sorry, go
I
on.
was gonna say, and it has such a quiet ending in along those lines too. Like for a book that is in many levels about this war, and it has such a understated and quiet ending that I was very impressed by that move. A lot of people don't have the confidence, let's say, to have a small, quiet ending like that. Uh,
Yeah.
they're always saying like end on a big note. It's like, big climactic event. It's like, yes, there is these climactic events, but it has that little denouement, if you want to call it
Yeah,
that.
I think of it as a denouement as well. Initially the ending was different. It was very quiet and it had a lot more soft reflection of Arminius realize like so in the end Arminius wins. The Germans win. That's not a spoiler. This is 2000 years old. It's a
Yeah,
spoiler.
that's history,
Yeah.
kids.
In the end the Germans win. They won. But Arminius is looking around and watching the tribesmen like just mutilate the Romans, the prisoners. And these are guys that Arminius has fought with. And he's realizing that his idea of this great Germanic society is it's just trading one brand of violence for another. They're doing what's been done to them. And it's not what he wants. And so the idea was initially that he watches all this stuff and we were just going to show Honoria, and it was that Honoria reaches the gates, the river fortresses along the Rhine, and the scene was going to be her on a horse, looking back at, um, the forests of Germania, and then going through a gate, and it was going to be dark, and the last shot was supposed to be her passing through this gate. I mean, like a symbolic growth, new gatekeeping, all that stuff. There was like a lot of levels of symbolism there. But our editor Allison was telling me when we first were working on it, she goes, I go, this is good. She even said, she's like, this is gonna make you mad because it's gonna be some heavy lifting, but they need to see each other before it ends. And I'm like, and I go, because she goes, she's rejecting him. We show her rejecting him, but it's a passive rejection. We need an active rejection, and it's got to twist the
Sure,
knife.
yeah.
And even Nick was not too perfect. Nick wasn't too hot on it because he had all of his panels planned
Hmm.
out already. And then when Allison said it, we sat down and we talked about it. And there was never a point where I was like, no, you're wrong, Allison. I agreed with her. I totally agreed with her because it was worse, because it was
Yeah.
more painful. The concept of, like, you got to kill your darlings, because she was right. Like, she goes, so you're saying that if she ran into him, she would go back to him? Like, absolutely not. Like, she was done with him. Like, the looking back on the woods was her looking back at him. He is the wilds, and she is choosing to go through the Roman archway. She's choosing Rome over the forest. That's it. Like, that to me is the symbolic representation of both sides in this conflict. The woods, the arch. She goes through the arch. But she goes, is she rejecting Germania or is she rejecting him? You need to be very clear with it. And like, Allison is an Eisner winning editor. So if she's going to double down on something, I'm going to listen to what she's saying. So what's great too is that ending was my first draft of the ending.
Oh,
Like, when,
really?
like, in the sense of
Hmm.
like, but the edits, like, there wasn't a revision after a revision. That was the very first rewrite. She's like, that's it. And I remember her
Hmm.
reaction. She goes, this hurts to read, and that's perfect. And I'm like, that's exactly it. If we'd had more pages, we would have like elaborated out. Like, I still wish that final panel of him sitting on the dead horse, which is so strong. I wish that we could have had that as a splash page. I really do wish that you could get that even page reveal, full splash of him sitting on a dead horse, because I think it
Sure.
works on so many levels. It's like all the suffering that she's taken, the beatings that we see her take, and she's like, this was you did this to me, and it's just like, oh, that's gotta suck. And that scene, okay, so to put that, we're talking about research, the scene where it shows her and all the cavalry charges out and she's on the horse. So I've had people like chirp me about that, and that happened. That was something that actually happened. When the Romans knew it was over, the light cavalry and anyone with a horse charged through to break the lines so that they could get word out. That
Hmm.
did happen. And there's like archaeological evidence and multiple recorded records of that evidence happening. So I put her in that position because it gave her an out, and B, it was real. That did happen. And so putting her in the middle of it made sense to me. And for Varys, he wants her to get out so that she can get to Rome and give his children time to take whatever gold they can, because nothing good is going to happen to that family. Like, that's the Roman way. You brought shame to the empire, you will lose everything. So by her getting back to Rome, giving his family an opportunity to escape, plays with the character, it works with the surroundings, and that moment for her of looking at Arminius and being like, "No, I've got work to do. I take my vows seriously, unlike you. I've got to go do what I've got to do." And then he's done. He lost everything by trying to do what everybody told him to do.
Before I let you go, can you talk a bit more about Nick Marinkovich and how you kind of, and just to get a bit more into the art style, how
Oh
you kind of
yeah.
hooked up with him, and
I
just
was
as a
scared of
writer,
Nick.
how you kind of go about thinking of what art style is going to match this story.
Dude, I was so precious about finding the right artist for the story. I talked to multiple people. I'm a huge Eduardo Rizzo fan. Like, I love Eduardo Rizzo. He's like one of my absolute favorites. 100 Bullets is probably my favorite comic series of all time. Warts and all. Um, but I I was kind of up and down about who I would go to get to do it, and it was at a show in Toronto, and I was talking with the aforementioned Kalman Andrzejowski, and he's like, Nick Marankovich, that's your guy. He just did this book called Kank about the bicycle thief. You gotta look at him. And Nick was at the show, and he had this book called The Voyager, which is about like these 1700s pirates and this conspiracy and whatnot. And it like I took a look at the book, and I was like, Jesus Christ, that's the guy. And so I went to his table, and I was like, "Hey man, I got this story I want to do, and it's really cool. I think you'd be good at it." And Nick, oh dude, he brushed me off so hard. He brushed me off so hard. And then and so it was kind of like the soft brush off, but I knew he didn't really have any interest in working with me. He didn't know who I was and didn't care. And then I messaged him. It was on Facebook. I messaged him on Facebook Messenger, and he will insist that this is true. I wonder if it's like him looking back at the past with rose-colored glasses or anything. But he was listening to that podcast, The History of Rome, and it was the episode about the Varian disaster. And then that was when my message came while he was listening to it. And then he goes, so I knew that, like, the universe is saying I should probably listen to this. And we went up for drinks. And then before we didn't even talk money. We didn't even discuss the money aspect of it. We just hammered out that opening scene where she's in the wagon, and then there's the flow of the curtain on the wagon that transitions into the flow of the curtain around the bed, and her reflecting on the night before, and all the symbolic idea of like him saying, I will, I will free you by your gods and mine, like you'll be free. And it's all those things, like, and I was like, and then what's going to happen is that she will be free, but she won't be free because of him. She'll be free because she's been freed by her master. And it'll have all these double entendres. And I go, and I want those opening pages, when you go back and read the story and then go back and read the opening, it is just like pop, 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 pop. That's it. That is the macro and the micro in all of the elements and symbolic, like, aspects of the relationship are present in that opening. They're all there if you go back and look at it. Like, I actually dedicated the book. My thank you is to my grade 9 English teacher, Mrs. Blewett. And she was like that teacher that really like opened my eyes to the concepts of like double entendres and symbolism and small scale, large scale. And I was such a shitty student. But I remember in the story, in the book, I even said, I remember her looking at me and I get that like parental look of disappointment. And she said, she goes, "You could be so good at this if you just tried." That's what she said. I remember, like, she goes, "You could do." And I remember feeling like, I let you down, but I'm so lazy, I don't care. And now it's like I really try. I'm trying so hard, and I'm so grateful for her as a teacher for saying those words to me, because they rattle around in my head all the time. And Nick is like, to do the story with Nick is like, he makes all of that effort show up on the page, which is dope. I'm stoked for everyone to see the second arc. Like, the volume 2 is going to be, oh, it's dark. It's
Do you have a
so dark.
release date for that or any sort of timeline at this point, or no?
No, because Nick is super behind.
Sure, yeah.
It's gonna be great when it comes.
Well, where can people find out more about your work? And of course, they should, pick up Dead Romans. I really recommend this book for you listening. I love this book, and it is relatively available. It's being reprinted, so even
Yeah.
when it's sold out, you can still pre-order it or get an order it in. And it is, I think it's just an excellent book. But where can people find out more about you or about this project, or just kind of find you? What's the best place to kind of find you online?
Oh, I'm easier to find on like Twitter, Instagram at fearless_Fred. That's the best place to find me. That's where I'll be. That's where you'll see me.
Fearless_Fred. And well, thanks so much for talking to me. Thanks for thinking of Romans, and keep writing the wrong way.